Hey folks, and welcome back. I'm Eric Sunset, your host of the DocBuddy Journal. Here at DocBuddy, we deliver healthcare solutions that take the pain and cost out of broken workflows like OpNote, which gives ASCs the power of instantly generated operative reports approved from the point of care. Learn more about OpNote and all of our other great solutions at DocBuddy.com. Good to be back. Good to see everybody again, or good to have you join us. If you're attending the New Jersey Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers annual conference this week, be sure to visit DocBuddy at table 37 to see how OpNote can make a difference at your facility. I'm really bummed out to not be joining the DocBuddy crew at this particular event. There is a trivia night being hosted by the NJAASC crew. And if you know me at all, you know I love trivia. But I hope everybody that is in attendance, both the attendees and the vendors, as well as the organizers, have a great event this week at the Palace at Somerset. They're in beautiful New Jersey. And I think we've got all of our housekeeping out of the way now. So let's go ahead and jump into the meat of today's show, which is the recently published Medscape Physician Burnout and Depression Report 2024. We have much work to do, and that much is obvious. Regular listeners of the show will know a couple episodes back we covered the Class Arch Collaborative's annual burnout report. There's certainly some parallels between Medscape's data and the class data, and I think the data has more than parallels. But some of the commentary is a little bit different. Some of the factors going into these self-reported feelings of burnout and depression, some of the commentary is a little bit different. Interesting in both cases. And we'll have obviously a link to the new Medscape report in the show notes. And before we get into it, we need to discuss their methodology just a little bit so that we're standing on even ground here. And the way that it worked was that physicians were invited by Medscape to participate in a 9 or 10-minute online survey. These had to be U.S. practicing physicians. Medscape got just about 9,200 respondents across 29 specialties that successfully were screened and completed the survey. The data was gathered from July to October of last year. And I don't know that it really matters, but people are generally a little more happy to take a survey if they know they might get something in return. And in this case, it was a sweepstakes for a $150 Amazon gift card. And that's always fun to have a little prime action on the house, get something new, a couple new boxes delivered to the pad. But anyway, let's get into it. This is what you're here to know more about. And we'll start by kind of stating the obvious per Medscape that burnout and depression have become powerful foes to doctors who hope to be effective practitioners and enjoy a well-rounded life. We'll intersperse some of the Medscape commentary with our own here. Obviously, the effect COVID had on physician burnout and depression can't be understated. That's massive. And in a parallel back to that Class Arch Collaborative survey, you would see that depression and burnout in the run-up to COVID-19, and really 2020 is the start of all those feelings of depression here in the US for physicians, and I guess among others as well. But you see that depression and burnout number is fairly steady right up until 2020, and then it spikes. And Medscape does a cool job splitting out feelings of burnout from feelings of depression. And these trend lines follow sort of the same slope that you hit 2020, both burnout and depression. Burnout, a little sharper uptick, depression, certainly an uptick, but not quite as sharp as burnout, increases. And then coming back to this point here, the parallel to the class data, you can see that for 2024, it sort of tails down a little bit for the first time in 5 years. Medscape points out that physicians self-reported both depression and burnout a little less frequently than in last year's survey after steady climbs through the worst COVID years. And Heather Farley, Dr. Farley, is an emergency physician and chief wellness officer at Christiana Care up in Wilmington, Delaware. She's cited quite a bit through this article, so we'll look at her commentary at our own where it's appropriate. And she's saying there's definitely an increase in national awareness in the healthcare profession, with more health systems investing in wellness infrastructure and hiring wellness officers. Unfortunately, the pandemic related stressors have been replaced by new and exacerbated stressors in the form of financial pressures, which have many health systems making fewer people do more. No question about that. We know that staffing is a huge issue, whether you're unable to compensate them how they would like to be compensated and they choose to work elsewhere, whether you just can't make a hire, whether you have a tough time retaining staff because the guys and gals down the road will pay them more. We know that's the case. You've heard it here. Physician organizations, regardless of specialty, regardless of care setting, are having to do more with less than they've ever had to do before. So continuing down the line here, which specialties have the greatest burnout rates? The number one specialty isn't going to be a shocker: emergency medicine, followed by OBGYN, oncology, pediatrics, family medicine, and then radiology sort of give you your top six there. So with emergency medicine, that's not hard to see why that's experiencing the greatest rates of burnout as a specialty. The rest of these, pediatrics, family medicine, I think to an extent OBG, depending on the practice, you could kind of consider those, or kind of consider OBG a primary care specialty. Not really, like, don't rip me apart for that. I do understand that that is a specialty as opposed to pediatrics or family medicine, which are your true primary cares there. 2 years running that emergency medicine has topped the list of being either burned out, depressed, or both. And then pediatricians and family physicians, as well as OBs, were near the top of that list last year. One interesting note that one of the survey experts shares is that burnout among cardiologists and critical care physicians has declined recently after spiking during the pandemic. The correlation is obvious to see. The causation is a little bit more interesting, though. Are there less folks needing their care now that we're at the other end of COVID? Probably. In addition to splitting out feelings of burnout from feelings of depression, Medscape also has some interesting data around gender, and they point out in their sort of opening slide that this is self-reported gender. So men and women are experiencing burnout slightly differently, with women over the course of time, with their data going back to 2018, female physicians feeling a little more burned out than men on the whole. And that may be due to some of the factors we're going to look at later on, which is, are you willing to admit you're burned out? And some of it has to do with different levels of resources for female physicians, such as fewer mentoring and sponsorship resources than an average male doctor enjoys, from Dr. Farley once again there. There are also cultural factors like fewer women in leadership roles who can advocate for them, plus compensation disparities and fewer career advancement opportunities. I certainly don't want to take anything away from those points. I think they're fair. I think they're valid. But when you look at men and women in general, wired slightly differently from each other. So while women are evidently more willing to self-report feelings of burnout and depression, I would guess that these sentiments align a little more closely than their graph would show, where women traditionally reporting higher feelings of burnout by year, on average by about plus 10 points from their male counterparts. The story remains the same, though. Physicians are burned out, and the reporting and the data shows that it's getting slightly better. But we can't forget that it's still not good. Just because a bad situation has gotten slightly better doesn't mean that it's good. The trend is good, but we're still not in a good space. When you look at how much of your burnout or depression is due to job stress, virtually all of it is related to job stress. If you're a physician and you're burned out, there's an eventuality in the survey where that only some of your burnout is caused by job stress. Personal lives playing a factor here, obviously, but we open up an avenue here where we're looking at factors outside of their burnout from just being a physician and working as a physician. And I'm not sure that's totally pertinent to this report or to this article. In the study, in the writing, they call out a sort of a gender disparity here, where women traditionally have more to handle on the home front, like with childcare and household issues on top of their job stress. However, when you look at the data and you look at these neat little donut charts between men and women, there's really no difference. In both the case of men and women doctors, more than half are saying that some of it is caused from their stress. 30% are saying all of it is caused from their job. And I don't think I stated that correctly. 53% of men and women say most of their burnout is due to their job as a physician. And then in each case, 30% also say that all of it is due to their job stress. So, kind of an interesting aside there that we're looking at factors beyond their jobs as physicians. We're on a healthcare podcast with a health IT, hosted by a health IT company. Can't really do a whole lot for you in your personal life if your romantic relationship is crumbling around you, unless it's due to the amount of time you spend at work, and then DocBuddy can certainly help you with that. So a couple call outs in the commentary on these self-reported physician levels of burnout and depression. It takes 12 hours a day at work just to keep my head above water, plus working 3 to 4 hours each day on weekends. We've heard that before. That's painful. And we'll look at some of the factors going down the line. Administrivia, lack of autonomy, these are things we know really plague physicians. Next, my job expects me to complete modules in my off time and be on call via the phone without pay or allowed time off the next morning. This aligns with one of those physician gripes that we have talked about before, which is a lack of alignment with their leadership and with their organization. You could see why that would be a problem. Uncompensated work time, that's always painful. My department lacks leadership and continues to deteriorate in many ways. Seemingly, no one in authority chooses to do anything about it. That's a bad feeling. The question I would have back, though, would be, what would you like to have done? And we'll look at that later on. But what would you do to solve this issue? Next, I'm held hostage to patient satisfaction scores that involve hospital care outside of my control. Gosh. We've talked to some leaders in the ASC space and in the practice space over the last handful of podcasts, especially with our ASCA 2024 speakers. This really revolves slightly around value-based care. So you're asking a physician in a practice setting to be responsible for outcomes and patient satisfaction at the hospital, where they are not, different care team, different physicians. So that's tough when you're out of alignment there. The value chain is not stacked in the practice physician's favor. And then my favorite quote here: I have reached my limit for the BS I can take from the hospital administration, insurance companies, and demanding patients. And that demanding patients aspect is kind of interesting. We've talked about the increase in the consumerization of healthcare. Healthcare as a service, less so in the traditional sense that, I go see my doctor and this is like, I'm not paying for a good or a service, I'm just paying to see my doctor. People's minds are changing. People expect more. So I think that's a little bit of a two-way street there. And as we continue through our survey, how long have you felt burned out? Most respondents feel like they've felt burned out for longer than a year. And then if you think about, going up a flight of stairs, you have the most people feeling like it's been more than 2 years, some saying from 13 months to 2 years, a little bit less, 7 months to a year, and nobody who took the survey felt like they had felt burned out for less than a month. Dr. Farley again: I'm not surprised that physician burnout has a long duration. Burnout is primarily an occupational phenomenon, which is why a physician often will go on a vacation and return feeling as burned out as before. When the major contributors to their burnout are in the work environment, that's not going to change when they go on vacation. Burnout is also a lagging indicator, she adds, which means the workplace issues have been in place even longer. I'm not so sure about this point about vacation not helping, though. I would hope. that as a physician that feels burned out, as anybody working any job feels burned out from their work, you go on vacation, hopefully that is a chance to unplug, unwind, relax, do whatever it is you do to make you feel a little more human. But I don't think that's unique just to physicians. I think anybody in a stressful job will come back to their job from vacation, hopefully feeling refreshed, but then you get right back into the swing of things. Got a lot to do. People depend on you. I need to perform. So is that unique to physicians and their sentiments around burnout or returning from vacation? I don't think so. Now, this is really an interesting part of the study from Medscape. What contributes most to your burnouts? And we'll want to note here that respondents could select up to 3 choices. So your top choice of what contributes most to your burnout is too many bureaucratic tasks like charting and paperwork. Next, too many hours at work. Then, lack of respect for administrators, employers, colleagues, or staff, insufficient compensation, lack of control, the computerization of practice, which is EHRs. And it's kind of interesting that that is split out from too many bureaucratic tasks like charting or paperwork, and computerization of practice as its own response. There's certainly some still out there charting on paper, and especially if we're talking about places of service like the ASC perhaps, or if you're like in a plastic surgery practice where it's not totally mandatory to have an EHR. You probably should. There's a lot of good reasons to do it. A lot of good reasons to look at DocBuddy too for your bite-sized electronic record, bite-sized gateway to a digital record, without all the cumbersome clunkiness that comes with some of these EHRs. But if you look at those 2 responses and combine them, that's going to be far and away your biggest issue with what would be 86% of respondents choosing that. The math's a little wonky there, but the point stands. Lack of respect from patients and then government regulations round out all of your responses that are not other. We need to call out here the top 3 factors chosen most often have held steady for several years in this Medscape survey. Bureaucratic tasks also topped that list at 61% of respondents in last year's report. And then McLean adds, there's always going to be bureaucracy that creates barriers to providing quality care. Even if a health system has an overarching program to minimize administrative tasks, there will be granular rules at the unit level that add to that burden. Oh, there's a couple tangents to take here. So if you're in a big health system or if you're part of a big group, there are going to be protocols that you as a physician need to follow because that's what the group says, even if that goes against your better judgment as a physician, for the proper way to treat and care for this patient and deliver the outcome that everybody wants to have. If you don't like that so much, then perhaps employment as a physician isn't the best route for your career. Perhaps then you need to consider independent practice or joining a group that allows you more autonomy, which again, lack of control or autonomy is your number 5 most popular response to why I feel burned out as a physician in this Medscape article. But that, in this particular study, shows that lack of autonomy is a problem. And then if we flash back to the Class Arch Collaborative article, we'll just run through this real quick. Their contributors to burnout, the top contributors to burnout: staffing shortages, too many bureaucratic tasks at number 2, chaotic work environment, no control over workload, after hours workload, EHR inhibits efficiency. We're all talking kind of about the same thing in slightly different terms. There's an art and science to creating surveys, and depending on what it is you really want to know, even if you're polling a similar population, in this case, it's physicians with Medscape. In the case of class, it's physicians and nurses. But it's interesting how, though the exact response choices are slightly different, we're still hitting at the heart of the same matter. Too many bureaucratic tasks, chaotic work environment, no control. And those are your Class Arch Collaborative burnout top issues, along with staffing. Then you flip back to Medscape, too many bureaucratic tasks, too many hours at work, lack of respect, insufficient comp, and lack of control and autonomy. You can see that the career path as a physician is broken. Why? A lot of reasons why. Bad workflows, too much time spent after hours doing your job, not enough staff, like we see that on the class article, not enough staff. Well, does that then mean that physicians are having to practice below their license? We talk about charting or working at the top of your license. So doing physician things all the time would be working at the top of your license. Working below it would be like, oh gosh, handling intake paperwork or making copies of insurance cards. But that's a ridiculous example, but that would be way below the level of a physician's degree and experience and expertise. So we'll come off that soapbox for just a little bit and look at how severe is your burnout. We're back to the Medscape article. How severe is it? And at the very far end of the scale, it's a 5 out of 5. It's so severe that I may leave medicine. And then at the other end, 1, this burnout, I have it, but it doesn't interfere with my life. It's a somewhat standard distribution, like the bell curve, right? Everybody remembers that from high school or college stats. Most respondents, both men and women, fall into that middle, where it's not so severe that I'm going to quit, but it also is not interfering with my life. So I'm at number 3. Number 4 is a little heavier than you'd expect in a standard distribution because there's just about 1.5 times more 4s than there are 2s. And then where you would expect to have like a skinny tail in a normal standard distribution, you get that on the one side where burnout doesn't interfere with my life. That's a skinny tail, 2 and 3% of respondents for women and men respectively. But on that severe end, what you'd expect to be a skinny tail is not so skinny because you have 16% of women physicians and 14% of men physicians saying that their burnout is so severe that I might leave medicine. We have a quote here from Dr. Nigel Gurgraw, PhD. He's a gastro and internist and chief wellness officer at Oxner Health out there in New Orleans. Shout out Louisiana. I'm not surprised that the percentage who say they may leave medicine. A national survey shows 30 to 40% of physicians say there's a likelihood they'll leave their practice in the next 2 years. And that's Dr. Gurgraw's emphasis, not mine. But only about a third actually do, and I would think the same would apply here. Even so, Dr. Gurgraw says it's disturbing how many doctors will leave FTE status or take similarly strong actions with their jobs to cope with burnout. Now, I'm not familiar with that study that says only about a third of these physicians threatening to leave their job actually do, but we've talked about this slow motion walk to the edge of the cliff that is the shortage of physicians that we are currently experiencing and which will become a cataclysm over the next 5 to 7 years, where there's hardly enough physicians for the amount of people seeking care. So I'm inclined to take these providers at their word. And when you look at the burnout data over the last 5 and 6, 7 years, it's not so hard to see why they would actually leave medicine. Let's get personal for a second. Has burnout negatively affected your personal relationship? Well, 13% of providers say yes, a lot. 73% say yes, somewhat. Being a physician and feeling burned out has somewhat affected my personal relationships. And only 14% say no, it has not impacted my personal relationships at all. In last year's report, 65% of doctors answered yes to this question. Here's a quote. First and foremost, it's important for physicians to recognize when they're struggling, to take a self-assessment and not just try to push through it. Physicians should tap into resources like EAPs and peer support and also share their struggles with family and friends. Nurture those relationships and don't let them languish. I take a little bit of umbrage here. Those points being made, tapping into resources, looking for peer support, and share their struggles with family and friends. When you look at the survey data, it shows that those things do appear to ease the feeling of burnout. What do those things do to actually address the root cause of burnout, though? And the answer is not much. You do need to balance that if we have physicians that are feeling so burned out they're going to leave medicine, we need to do anything we can to make any resource available possible to ease those symptoms so that they stay in medicine longer. Now, this is obviously removing the personal layer out of this. We're looking at physicians as a cog in a machine. That's not fair. But when we're talking about healthcare in the US, we're all just cogs in the machine. There's no individual patients, there's no individual providers. We're looking at inputs and we're looking at outputs. And do you have the ability to process those inputs into outputs? So while these resources like taking an assessment, it's like, do I really need to take an assessment? I'm feeling burned out and I have for the last 2 years. I don't need to take a quiz to tell me how burned out I am. I know how bad it is. Does that address the root cause? No. Does talking to your friends and family and peers about how burned out you are address the root cause? No. I'm all for it for easing symptoms. I'm not saying to bottle up your emotions and just let it ride and see how long you can handle it. No. So while these things are helpful in easing the symptoms of burnout, they do next to nothing to actually address the issues, which again revolve around too many bureaucratic tasks, no control over workload, after hours work, EHR and legacy tech inhibiting efficiency. You can talk until you're blue in the face about how much you dislike your legacy electronic health record. That doesn't make it any easier to use, though. Moving on, does your employer seem to recognize burnout problems? 23% of respondents say yes. Almost half, at 48%, say no, my employer does not seem to recognize burnout problems. And about a third, at 29%, say they're unsure. Around half of doctors felt that their employers weren't paying enough attention to burnout levels in their physician staff. Dr. Gergeraw says that's a big problem. But I think you'll see the percentage go down over the next few years. There's an increasing awareness among executives in healthcare that well-being is a leading quality indicator, if not the indicator, of favorable outcomes in patient care, staff turnover, and other vital areas. Yeah, you bet that organizations are aware of their employees, whether they're physicians, nurses, any type of role in the healthcare system. You bet that employers are aware of these burnout problems. Again, we talked about inputs and outputs, and are you able to process those inputs into outputs just a moment ago? What's good for the goose will be good for the gander here in easing those symptoms of burnout, not having to hire and replace folks that leave your organization because you happen to run a meat grinder. You'll make yourself more palatable to new hires. So does your employer seem to recognize burnout problems? You bet they do. Another sort of micro point in this larger discussion: would open dialogue with coworkers about burnout help? A third of respondents say yes, 35% say no, and 32% say they are unsure. There's no predominant opinion among physicians when taking this Medscape survey that emerged whether the openness with coworkers about their burnout levels could be productive. Quote, there's been a degree of learned cynicism or skepticism among physicians in terms of how much real help to expect from the workplace with professional burnout, Dr. Gergeraw believes, and coworkers might not be regarded much differently in that realm than CEOs and HR directors would, he say. Yeah, well, I think this is a really pragmatic approach. Physicians are generally pragmatic people. Talking about it doesn't fix the root cause. It can help ease symptoms and sensations of burnout and depression, but it doesn't do anything to actually fix it. So what's the point? I would imagine is the follow-on to that. My thoughts, not the Medscape articles there. Interestingly, Medscape also asks for coping mechanisms that physicians use for burnout. And there's some kind of like good, bad, and ugly here. Exercise is the top coping mechanism reported by physicians feeling burnout in this study. Over half of respondents chose exercise. talking with family and friends at 49%. So again, a coping mechanism. It eases the sensations of burnout. And none of these things are going to, fix the root cause. Obviously, we're talking about coping mechanisms. But talking with family or friends at 49%. Sleep, that's a little disheartening to see when we're talking about both burnout and depression. So if sleep is your coping mechanism, hopefully that's not all you're doing. Spending time alone, listening to music, eating junk food, and as an enjoyer of all flaming hot products, eating junk food is certainly something that I can relate to. Then it gets a little dark here. Drinking alcohol at 24% is a coping mechanism for physician burnout, and that's not unique just to physicians. Through the pandemic and out the other side, there's been quite an increase in the consumption of alcohol. There's a generational divide, obviously, here. So we're kind of excluding Gen Z. Our Zoomers aren't drinking quite as much as our millennials, our Gen Xers, our boomers, and so on. Meditation and other similar stress reduction techniques, binge eating. And then you get down into the single-digit responses of using prescription drugs, smoking or using nicotine products, using cannabis products at 3, 2, and 2% respectively. Not great, not a good coping mechanism there. But obviously, as adults, everybody is free to make their own choice. Then we start to get into the actual solutions here. And before we look at this Medscape article's solutions, let's flash back to the class Urge Collaborative reporting around the same issues. Ways to alleviate burnout. The class overwhelming most popular response was improve staffing. Next, align leadership with physicians and nurses, provide better pay, improve EHR efficiency, decrease workload, provide better wellness benefits, which again, we're talking about easing symptoms, not fixing the root cause. Like not having wellness benefits, doesn't make you more burned out than not. It can help. Not a root cause fix though. And then coming back over to the Medscape more recent article, at the top of the list, won't be a shocker, increase compensation. 48% of respondents say that increasing comp would help most with burnout. That would help, I'm waxing a little poetic here. You've heard the story about the frog in the boiling water, that and this is an experiment from long ago, I don't think you could do it today. If you have a pot of boiling water and you throw a frog in it, the frog is going to jump out. It doesn't want to be in the boiling water. But if you take a pan of water, put a frog in it, and add heat slowly until it boils, the frog won't jump out because it gets used to the heat. I think you're looking at sort of the same type of issue here. People will put up with more. Physicians will put up with more the higher they are compensated. But you're still that frog that gets put into the pan of water that's on a slow boil and slowly increasing in temperature. You're still going to have people burned out no matter how much you pay them. It's just a matter of time. They'll put up with it longer. Adding support staff is the second most popular option in this Medscape survey. Makes a lot of sense. We know there's a shortage of workers of all types in healthcare, and for that matter, across all types of careers and all types of roles. But you'd be eliminating some of the administrative burden that's being shouldered by physicians with more support staff. More flexible schedules is next. Increasing physician control and autonomy. Yeah, heard that one before. More respect from administrators, employers, colleagues, and staff. It doesn't ever feel good to be disrespected, but what's driving that sensation of feeling disrespected? Like, is it because you're working below your license as a physician? I don't know. I'd like to know more about that. Certainly don't dispute that feeling disrespect is a driver for burnout. It certainly is. But I'd like to go a lot deeper into that question. Lightening patient loads, and then making counseling available, check-ins with other physicians, offer different jobs. Well, I got to tell you, in a fee-for-service world, lightening or lessening would be an easier way to put that if you're not looking at the word. Lessening patient loads, that isn't going to happen. there's absolutely no chance of lightening patient loads, especially when there's a shortage of physicians. That means that patients are waiting longer for care. That means you're going to be working longer hours. And then we're not done looking at this report, but then we come back to full circle here. We come back to full circle. You have to stop everything or do everything you can to stop the early retirement of physicians from their careers. You need to get kids excited to go through medical school and then become a physician. But neither of those things are happening. And in fact, the opposite is happening. Physicians are retiring earlier than ever, and there are less kids interested in going through med school to become physicians than ever. So lessening the patient load, like that would be nice, obviously, so you get more high quality care, more time with every visit with your provider. But those stark realities of a lack of physicians and a lack of medical school students in a fee-for-service world where there's certainly a profit motive from these large health systems, hospitals, to see as many patients as possible. Now lessening patient loads, like come on, just isn't going to happen. Next, how doctors change their work environment to reduce burnout. Reduced work hours. Imagine that. The less you work, the less burned out you are. And I don't mean that cynically. That phraseology sounds a little harsh for our friends who are physicians and who are feeling burned out. But yeah, work-life balance is critical to this. And looking at all of the data that we have over the course of this podcast, we know that more autonomy over your work, less charting after hours, 0 time spent on the weekends, ideally doing any charts or administrivia, that's awesome. That's how you really take a bite out of burnout, because that's an actual root cause. Next, most popular response here, change work settings. Got a different job. That'll do it. Made workflow or staff changes to ease workload. And that's like a dog whistle here at DocBuddy. Made a workflow or staff change to ease workload. Well, we're all about removing the pain and cost out of broken workflows from DocBuddy. So hopefully we played at least a small part in that response of how doctors change their work environment to reduce burnout. Spoke with hospital or group administration about productivity pressure. This gets back to that lessening the workload, lessening the patient load. And there's probably a few switches that you can flip there. But like I've told you before, I'm not a hospital administrator. I don't oversee staffing for physician practice, but there's only so much that can be done. You need to see a minimum number of patients per day in order to keep doing what you're doing. And then next, sold the practice or put it up for sale at 4%. And then, one of the second most popular response was none of these. We'll get back to how surveys are written, which we talked about earlier. So none of these was the second most popular response behind reduced work hours. Coming back to Dr. Gergra out there at Oxner Health, these responses tell me that many of our physicians don't feel a sense of autonomy or agency in terms of impacting the work environment. They are taking actions that rely on themselves. Pretty telling, because at the end of the day, that's all you can really do. You've got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps to an extent, no matter what it is you're talking about. And then a little more somber data here coming next. The percentage of physicians who are depressed. So we started out this chat saying that there is a split between feeling burned out and feeling depressed that the data makes. 27% of respondents say they are clinically depressed. And the difference here is that severe depression lasts some time, not caused by a normal grief event, where colloquial depression, where 2/3 of respondents sit, is a feeling of being blue, sad, burned out, etc. And since Medscape's 2018 report, the rate of clinical depression that physicians reported rose, while the percentage of colloquial depression was around the same. This year, women who were experiencing depression were likelier than men to describe it as clinical. That's 32 versus 23% for women versus men. Men more often called their depression colloquial at 68 versus 58% of women. However, Dr. Farley feels that many doctors are not great at self-diagnosis and not reliable at parsing between less and more severe forms of depression. For that reason, physicians would be better off immediately seeking treatment or counseling than gauging their depression as too minor for the effort. Where during this show I've said that, talking about it doesn't address a root cause, and that was and was meant to be sort of tongue in cheek when we're looking at feelings of burnout. Do get help if you are feeling symptoms of clinical depression. Nothing tongue in cheek about that. How depression affects doctors' work life. Here's a few quotes from survey respondents. These are sad to see. Sad that folks are going through this. Quote, I've lost my drive to help and to innovate. I'm angry and sad about why I'm in this stage, as I've done nothing I can attribute it to beyond often stating the truth in the interest of patient care. I feel unwell. It's affected my sleep and appetite. I have chronic fatigue and pain that make it harder to work. I arrive at work every day trying to have a good outlook, but it only lasts 15 seconds. And I kind of cracked a grin there. We can all relate to that on some days. Hopefully not most days or even some days, but 1 out of 100 maybe. And then finally, I count down the hours until I can leave, and I'm unhappy talking to people. End quote. When you look at the factors that contribute significantly to physician depression, respondents to the Medscape article say that job burnout is top at 72%, physicians' responsibilities at 44%. And this is another one I'd like to go a lot deeper into this option as a response. Physician responsibilities. Are we at the top of the license where you're just doing doctor things, or are you having to handle more administrivia than you feel like you should? Next, at 31% are finances and world events. Also at 31%, family issues, my insecurity, health, romantic relationships, my personality at 14% of respondents as a factor that contributes significantly to physician burnout. And here's a few thoughts from the article. Again, in this year's survey, physicians chose job-related burnout most as a factor behind depression. And at a rising rate, 64% of them listed it among their top 3 stressors last year. Job burnout is not the same as depression, but it's a major risk factor for developing depression, Dr. Gergras says. There is some overlap. I think of burnout as an occupational syndrome. Over time, the resulting exhaustion can lead to depression. Burnout reduces the ability to address mental health challenges at an earlier stage. Also, and this is a footnote here, when the survey was conducted in late 2023, world events were seen as less responsible for physician depression than in last year's reports. Makes sense. We're one more year away from COVID in 2023 versus 2022. And now we get to, sort of the crux of this talking about it help people. It does, based on other data. Do physicians think that confiding in other doctors about their depression as a practical idea in this report? The answer is no. So they have a split out here between male and female physician respondents to the burnout and depression survey. Both men and women say 57% of them say no. It is not a practical idea. And about a fifth in both the case of men and women say that yes, it is practical, and then roughly a quarter say they are unsure. Female physicians were at most slightly more likely than men to say that being open with peers about their depression could bring positive results. The majority of both women and men found confiding with other doctors to be impractical. Why? There is still shame and stigma about depression, and that is a barrier. Most physicians are high-achieving and driven people, and they really struggle with the attitude that they should be stronger than this, that they shouldn't need attention at all. That doesn't mean they wouldn't seek care. It's just that they wouldn't see confiding in a colleague to be helpful. I don't totally disagree, but I think there's more to it than that. If you're unhappy with something and all you do is say how unhappy you are, did you fix your unhappiness? Or did it feel good short term to say that? I guess it depends how you're wired. We're talking about healthcare. Healthcare doesn't happen if physicians aren't treating patients. So let's look at how does depression affect your patient relationships. 40% of respondents say that they are now easily exasperated with patients. A quarter say I am less careful with patient notes like their history or filling out the EHR. And that's not a surprise because we know the EHR is such a driver of burnout, and the end stage of burnout is depression. 15% say that they express frustration in front of patients, 13% say they make uncharacteristic errors, and then about half say their interactions with patients are unaffected. Apologies for the technical glitch there. You would not believe what I just had to do to continue recording. So we'll go through the last couple of points here in this Medscape article, why you might not tell anyone about your depression as a physician that's burned out or depressed. Considering it to be a weakness, it makes a negative statement about somebody personally. People will think less of me. These are all just common human nature type responses to a prompt like that. And then as we look to sort of put a bow on this episode, we talked about the coping mechanisms for physicians feeling burnout or depression earlier. Some of the responses here on how do you maintain your happiness and mental health, spending time with family and friends, activities and hobbies, exercise, getting enough sleep, eating healthy, and so forth. One of the things I'll point out as we bring this episode home here, spending more time with family and friends has a direct inverse correlation with the amount of time spent working, and especially as a physician, spending time on administrative tasks, either after hours, after clinic, after you're through with your day's slate of procedures, hopefully not on the weekend, but that is an area where DocBuddy can absolutely make a positive impact for you. From the clinic to on-call at the hospital to the ambulatory surgery center, DocBuddy has a solution that will help you streamline your workflows, streamline your processes, and give you the ability to access, create, and move data from the point of care. So on behalf of the entire DocBuddy team, we want to thank you for listening. Be sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube so that you always can hear the newest episodes of the DocBuddy Journal. And until next time, I'm your host. Talk to you again soon.